So the big question is this: how do you lose all the weight that you want and actually keep it off for the rest of your life, while trying to make sense of all the noise that comes from the weight loss industry? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers.
G'day guys, and welcome to the next episode of the Weight Loss Secrets podcast. My name's Baron Grant and I'm rapt to be with you for another episode, another tip, an idea, something, a little bit of a nugget that can help you to be able to lose all your weight that you're after and keep it off for the rest of your life. That's what our sessions are about. That's what this podcast is about. It's about helping you make lifelong changes to your weight so you can live healthy for the rest of your life. That's what we're all about. Now, before I jump into today's content, make sure if you need help on that journey to head to ditchingthediet.com, where you can download a copy of my new book. You can also book a call with me. You can jump on one of my programs, just book a call in the top right-hand corner, and I'll be able to help you on your journey to lose all that weight and keep it off and create some really good habits that it can be lifelong. Now, with all that said, before I jump into the actual topic, I want to tell a quick story because I think it really highlights what I'm trying to talk about today. So a number of years ago, when I used to work in a different life, I guess, I worked at Yellow Pages. Now I know that most of you wouldn't use that too much anymore, but they were those books that we used to wrap, come to your house wrapped in plastic and you'd put them on the chair so that your little kids can reach the table. But they did used to get used quite a bit, and I used to work for Yellow Pages and I used to do corporate training with them. And in the corporate training that I used to do, I remember this one particular time where I'd done this training. It was on communication styles and how there's different types of people, things like an expressive style person and an analytical type person. And I'd done this whole training on this component. And I remember one time, after that discussion, there was this guy that started to talk. Now, this guy was clearly an opposite style to me. And I was more that sort of expressive style. I'm a bit fly by the seat of your pants, and I don't like everything very structured. Anyway, so this guy started talking. He was clearly a very opposite style to me. As he was talking, I must have lost interest in what he had to say, because I remember this vividly because it was such an interesting moment. And I must have dropped my head down and I started scribbling on the page in front of me as this guy was talking, because I felt like genuinely he'd been talking for 10 minutes. Maybe it was just a couple of minutes, but it felt like he was just going on and on and on. And so I'd sort of zoned out and I started scribbling, and I got bored out of my as I stumble on words, got bored out of my scribbling stupor when a guy in the room pointed at me and he goes, "Oh, you're totally expressive style. You're not paying any attention to what he has to say." And I was like, "Oh, that is horrendous." I felt so bad. I was so embarrassed. I was like, it's only one of the only times I've been super embarrassed at the front of a room, and I didn't know where to look or what to say. I can't remember how we moved on, but that moment was really embarrassing for me. I totally tuned out. I'd switched off. I was not listening in any way to what this poor guy had to say. Now, he might have been saying something really important, but for the life of me, I wouldn't be able to recall it because I totally switched my brain off. I was experiencing what you would call logokophosis. Now, that's a crazy word, but logokophosis is effectively when we don't comprehend the language. That's sort of what logokophosis means. But if you go even one step further and you look at the Greek translation, it means word deafness. And I love that. So we just go deaf to certain things or certain words when we're experiencing logokophosis. And this is a proper medical term. Now, my experience with logokophosis on that moment was extremely embarrassing. I looked like I didn't care about what this guy had to say. I was paying no attention. And it was just not a great experience, frankly, at that very moment in time as I had zoned out. I want you to think about your own lives when you zone out. And the reason that I'd zoned out is because I actually didn't think what he had to say was very interesting or very important. Clearly, otherwise I would have been attentive and listening. We all do that sometimes though. Have you done that? I bet you have at times. Maybe it's just as simple as, I'm a husband and I know my wife talks sometimes and I don't think I pay as good attention as I probably could. And And so I would say I'm not actively listening to what she has to say, but I might be content listening, and sometimes I'll repeat back some of the things she says, but I'm not really letting things sink in. I'm not really paying attention. And that experience with that guy, that poor guy where I ignored him, was extremely embarrassing one. I want you to think of your experiences with logokophosis, because it really is relevant when it comes to losing weight. And this is where I'm getting to. So I want you to think, is your logokophosis getting in the way of you losing weight? I'm going to give an example. This is not to pump my own tires up a bit, but every day I get on and do a podcast. And for the last 55, 56 days, I've jumped on and spoken about a topic that relates to weight loss. My question to you is, are you listening? Are you open to listen and to learn? That's the question. It's one thing to hear a message or to be present in the room when a message is being taught. It's another thing to engage and listen and then go ahead and hear enough and listen enough to go ahead and make changes in your life. And that's what I want you to think about right now. I've spoken about lots of different topics on this podcast, from amount of sugar that's in soft drink, why water is so good, about walking, about how weight loss actually works every single time for everybody. And it's simple concepts, but there are lots of different points. Are you listening to that stuff? Are you trying to make changes to that stuff? That's my question. Right? I was just talking to a lady today, and she'd be embarrassed if she hears this, but I was just talking to a lady today, and she said, Baron, I've watched all your videos and I've listened to this and I've done that, and I'm already doing it. And I was like, that is cool, because she's already lost weight before she even got on the phone to have a discussion with me. She was already down 5 or 6 or 7 kilos. I can't remember the exact number, but she was already down, and she'd already implemented changes based on what she learned. Now, are you doing that? Are you implementing changes based on the stuff that I've been talking about or that you've learned throughout this podcast? So it's about listening, and things that get in the way for us sometimes where we experience this logokophosis is that we have predetermined ideas in our mind about the way it should be done. For example, I hear all the time, Baron, I need to have my 4 slices of chocolate every night. That stops me from eating more. Bullcrap. That's not true, but we convince ourselves that that's a good thing to do because that's what we like. And remember, losing weight is not always about what we like, it's about what our body needs. Other people tell me when I go out, I have to have a drink. Bullcrap. It's not true, but we convince ourselves that that's the case. So what ends up happening is these little bits that we listen to lots of it, but then we don't listen to those certain bits and we tune out because that doesn't suit our narrative. So are you listening to all the bits and trying to act on all of the bits, or are you just trying to act on some of the bits and then excluding the stuff that doesn't fit your narrative because you think maybe it doesn't work for you? That might sound a little bit confronting, but think about it like this. If you've got a computer, when you turn on a computer, you press the button, something happens in the computer for it to work correctly. Now, I'm no tech guy in that sort of detail, right? I can operate an Apple TV and a computer, but I don't know how they build it all in the back end and how that all works. But when you turn it on, there is a process that the computer goes through to turn it on. It has to run different processes with different things. And then if you do it like that, it generally will work pretty well. Now, when you shut down the computer, it goes through a process as well. Hence the reason you shouldn't just hold the button and turn it off, because that will not shut it down correctly and it can cause damage to the actual components of the computer. So allowing it to go through its normal shutdown process is really important. So if you take different pieces out of that shutdown process, it ends up having a bit of a freak out. You might have experienced this with your computer. If you don't turn it off properly, it has a freak out. If you don't turn it on properly, it has a freak out. Like computers freak out all the time. But it'll freak out if you don't allow it to just do its thing. It needs to go through a set number of processes to make sure that it works. It's exactly the same with weight loss. There's a process that you've got to go through. If you follow that process, you'll win. It's really simple, really simple. But sometimes we listen to the process, but then we hear something we don't like, so we take a piece of that process out. And if we take a piece of that process out, guess what? It'll crap itself. It won't work. So, if you're not a fan of water, I don't want to drink water, well, you're not going to lose much weight. Simple as that. If you want to keep having a certain drink or a certain chocolate bar in the evening or a certain this or a certain that, it just won't work. like you start breaking the process. And so you got to stick to the process. And I've spoken about that in another one. But when we get caught in our own narrative because we want something to be a certain way, because we like it, then that's when we get ourselves in trouble, because we are experiencing logokophosis, which stops us from being able to hear properly. It gives us word deafness. So we just switch off to the stuff that we don't want to hear. But if we do that, if you're doing that at times, you're not going to get the weight loss that you're after. It's as simple as that. So I want you to go away today and think, am I listening? Am I changing? Or am I experiencing word deafness, logokophosis? That's the takeaway today. I want you to analyze yourself. Are you really ready to make that change? Or are you just sort of passively listening, but not really? We'll chat tomorrow. You're doing awesome. Talk soon.